Hey there, everyone. This is Adrienne Lopez, the Integrative Awareness Coach, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 45 of the Mind Heart Space podcast, now renamed Lifting the Veil. This week's topic is a continuation of last week. This is the Ego Triangle Part 2. Last week I'd shared about some common roles the ego constructs based on the belief of duality, which is actually a limited or inaccurate view of reality. And that's why these roles are so unsatisfying. And this is what leads many people to begin to examine the nature of reality and the role that they're playing more deeply. So today in part 2, I want to share with you some ways to begin stepping into a new way of operating outside of the paradigm of the ego, of the victim-villain, hero-villain, or hero-victim duality complex, I guess you could call it. The number one approach to making this type of transformation is beginning to learn how to powerfully understand and navigate your emotions, because it is the emotion which keeps these, or the unprocessed or unfelt level of emotion that keeps these ego constructs in place. And once you begin to understand the ego's role and what it's really trying to do, and then actually how it manifests in your life, you begin to have increased amounts of freedom to be who you are. You learn to build an inner capacity to hold the entirety of your lived experience without being afraid of it and without being pulled into ego structures unconsciously. But I just want to say it doesn't happen overnight, because like many of us, we've been living these ego programs for the entirety of our life. So it will take some practice. But when you begin this journey, you will build the strength to trust yourself and the life that's moving through you. And it will give you the courage to continue on your journey to the truth of who you really are outside of the protective mechanism called the ego. So I don't know about you. Well, I kind of do, because we really have a similar experience, all of us. We are growing up in a world that taught us to dismiss our emotions as inconvenient or something to get over or to push down. But our emotions are just messengers about whether our needs are being met. And this goes beyond just our physical needs of having food and shelter. Those are very, very important. But we also have huge emotional needs. Humans are one of the few species on this planet, if not the only species, that spends 18 years in order to become an adult. 18 years with a parent or a caretaker in order to learn how to function independently. And still that's questionable. We thrive on connection, whether that connection is hurtful to us or meets some of our needs, like our physical needs, but not necessarily our emotional needs. And because we are hardwired for connection and protection or survival, it's hard to step outside of this complex. And so today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you can begin to approach this. And I wanted to share a little bit about my story as how I became upon this knowledge and started to do this work. I was suffering the symptoms of this type of behavior, the repercussions. I was struggling to make sense of my place in the world with these limitations that weren't fulfilling. And I searched. I went to look in the books of wisdom and knowledge and philosophy and religion, and I had a thirst to understand, because my life really became bizarre, where everything began to look like I was in a fun house, but none of it was fun. It was actually really painful. And I had to admit that maybe life wasn't exactly what I thought it was, or what I was led to believe it was at all, because none of the old rules were working anymore. In fact, what I realized was that they never did. And I was just beginning to catch on to the real deal. I began to suspect there was something more going on underneath the surface that I hadn't looked at. And this was the beginning of my 20-year practice, or dive into meditation and yoga practice, where I began to hone the skills I needed to manage my internal space. And that's where mind-heart space emerged out of. I created a place for myself, and now for others, to encourage them to learn about the ways that their life energy works, how it can become congested, turn against itself in unhealthy ways, and develop into self-defeating behaviors. That seemed like our fault. But what I discovered in reality is that this ego mechanism is a product, or was a product, of my nervous system trying to adapt to an inaccurate version of reality. And it allowed me to begin to chip away underneath that, to begin to see the truth. This started my journey in taking responsibility for my own experience instead of relying on the world out there. It wasn't going to help me. This is when I began to not only coach myself but others by sharing my experience to empower myself along the way of this mind-bending journey back to myself. And as I mentioned earlier, in our culture, we're largely acculturated to ignore our emotions, which are powerful messengers. We're encouraged to get over them, to not cry, and to value this very important aspect of our being. And the cost of this can be seen all across our culture, in depression, psychological burnout, in antidepressants, alcohol and drug abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and all types of addictions. And so this disconnect from our life's blood, which is our emotions, creates all sorts of physical symptoms in our bodies and behaviors that emerge out of our inability to consciously work with our emotions. So today I'm going to share with you a little bit about how you can understand your emotions, what they're trying to tell you, and how you can use them as your ally instead of your enemy, something to be fearful of. So if you look at our biological system, our nervous system, we are beings in a physical body, and our body speaks to us in a different language than our intellect. And that's why our ego has such a difficult time with emotions, because they can't be processed through the intellect. Emotions are meant to be felt in the body. But the ego thinks that it can actually feel. And in actuality, when the intellect tries to process the emotion through the body, they are not effectively felt. We are not able to receive the information that they possess. This is why many people go to talk therapy and are unable to make process, because you can't talk your body through trauma. It has to be experienced in the body. And as a young child, a lot of times we experience emotion as overwhelming or too much, and it can feel scary. And then this gets amplified based on the reaction of our caregivers around us and their reaction to our emotion. And this is a lot of times why we don't feel safe to express our emotions. We don't get taught how to be with our feelings, let alone our needs. So, on the other hand, this creates a sense of shame or guilt about our feelings, that we don't have the right to feel them. And then we don't have the space to be human. We don't have the space to feel the loss of being seen and heard and accepted for the fullness of who we are, which very much includes our emotions, because those are connected to our needs. And a lot of us have been made wrong or bad or unacceptable when nothing about our human experience is wrong, bad, or unacceptable. It's the way that we grow. It's our experience. It's the way we evolve. And few of us, if none of us, have been given the tools to learn how to do this in a healthy way, to navigate and regulate our emotion, to understand the process of our nervous system. And instead we take on beliefs and behaviors that are an attempt to adapt to our home environments, which to some degree can actually be hostile or unwelcoming. So, to be honest, this is a product of our caretakers, our parents, not receiving a user's manual. They didn't receive the tools or knowledge to be able to educate us because they weren't educated about it. They weren't aware of how their nervous system worked and what emotions actually are and what the function of our emotions are. So really, when we have an emotion like joy or fear or sadness or discomfort, you name it, we are actually judging whether that's okay, if we have permission to have that emotion. And unfortunately, in addition to not being in touch with our emotions, we, as children, don't have the cognitive capacity or the linguistic processing ability or the nuance of vocabulary or even the self-awareness to be able to identify the emotion that we're having in our bodies as small children. And we can't intellectually process our experience, and that means that we can't put it in proper context in time and space. And it seems like to our unconscious, with all this unprocessed material gets placed, that there's no sense of time. So this unprocessed emotion is constantly unfolding in the now. And in that way, it's haunting us. And we don't even know it, because as adults, we are being led. All of this is leading us to an incredible opportunity to reparent ourselves, our ego, by giving our nervous system the space it needs to receive those exhaled parts of ourselves that are still there, quietly lurking at the vibrational level in our bodies, in our energetic bodies, in our unconscious mind. And they're waiting for us to welcome them back home, to be fully experienced and processed, and to be put back into time, into proper context, to give them a label and a name, to be witnessed. And this is a part of learning how to regulate our nervous system, so we can dissolve the ways we've been fighting against ourselves, trying to push part of our experience away. And that, my friends, is really impossible. And then we can create a little bit more freedom inside, the ability to house our nervous system fully and feel the emotion, because our mind or our ego thinks that it has a way to control it. In actuality, it's being controlled by this unfelt emotion, causes it to constantly run and distract itself. And so by doing this, it's like waving the white flag to your ego. There's a truce. And this is the beginning of a relationship that begins to allow your ego to feel safe enough to unveil what's really there. So, the next time you feel an emotion coming up, I invite you to do a series of steps. The first one is to notice what the emotion is. See if you can describe it or give it a label. Notice where it's showing up in your body. And then 2, notice your first reaction or your habitual response to it. Is it to step over it or to push it down or to act it out? And then thirdly, see if you can ask that emotion a question. What valuable wisdom is it trying to impart upon you? What is it trying to tell you? What's its message of wisdom? Why is it here? So taking these 3 steps can actually create a more empowered relationship to your own emotions and begin to invite your ego in to work collaboratively with you. So you don't have to feel out of effect of them. Instead, you can begin to take charge of your emotion as an important part of who you are, to experiencing them in your body fully without trying to use all your energy to ignore them or trying to tell them to go away. Your emotions are visitors with important messages for you. So take the time to listen and see what arises. All right, I think that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for visiting and listening to the Ego Triangle Part 2. I'm in the process of putting together a 3-part workshop called The Power of Self-Awareness, where we are going to dive in more deeply into this topic. And I will share with you different strategies and practices for beginning to clear these energy structures out and beginning to find more empowering ways to anchor your consciousness and live from. And so please keep your eyes open. I will share the exact dates when I have them here in this podcast, as well as my Mind Heart Space Facebook page and Instagram page, so you can follow me there. You can also check out my website at www.mindheart-space.com. Until next time, please remember what a valuable treasure you are, and bye for now.